Okay, I'm going to do another election update here on Saturday, October the 31st, Halloween. And so basically, the strategic situation hasn't really changed a lot in terms of polling, I think, for the last several days. A little bit, maybe moving, well, the real clear average right now of polls has 11 polls and is 7.8% up for Biden, which is a little bit off from his high in the tens or something. And of course, the way I've been looking at this thing is I see a lot of these polls go as high as 11% and things like that. It just doesn't seem to reflect at all what seems to be happening. Now, there is a caveat here, and I'll get to that later. But if something like normalcy is happening, you have if you look at those polls, there's two groups in it. There's a group of 8 polls, which average around 9%, 9.1 I think it is, and the remaining 3 polls, which are Harris X, Rasmussen, and the IBD tip poll, and they average around at 4. And they vary between 3 for Rasmussen and 5 for IBD tip, with Harris X being at 4. So looking at that set of polls, we see an average of 4 versus 9 if you take out those 3 polls from the average. So that's a 5-point gap in polls that probably would have margins of error of about 2.5 to 3%. But consider that if you aggregate them all together, that would collapse their margins of error down substantially. So in reality, it's 2 different worlds, frankly. 2 different views of the world, methodologies. It's not the same thinking, obviously, in those polls. It's not random chance. Because, for instance, you could take the same polling methodology and simply run the sample on the same day twice and keep the counts separately, and then compare them. You get different results because of statistical variation, just random sampling. How many times you toss the coin, and whether it's heads or tails, that kind of thing. And then there's real differences having to do with real data that you're tracking. Well, here this 5-point gap just doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? The difference between the IBD tip and the Rasmussen of 2 points is well within their margin of error, and there's a kind of variation you'll see day to day just sampling. So the question, I guess, is who do you believe? Well, most of the polls in the higher group are pretty much run by obviously liberal organizations that have liberal agendas otherwise. And so my thinking is that they are biased. Now, maybe that's wishful thinking or honest thinking, but that's kind of my analysis. So I'm going with the set that averages around 4. And then look at the fact that 2 out of 3 of those actually has a situation of being human people, calling people up and talking to people and asking them who they're going to vote for. The Rasmussen poll uses an automated voice system, and you're basically, I guess, I never had them poll me, but you're not talking to a real person. So I guess you're just punching 1 for Trump and 2 for Biden and 3 for other candidate and 4 for I've undecided or something like that. So that's the kind of poll that is. So therefore, there's no intimidation feeling of what you're going to think another person is going to be thinking of you when you punch the button. So I think that cuts through a little bit of the shy voter effect. And we also should know that within the past few days, that same poll has varied from Trump up 1 to the current value of 3 down. So if you take an average of that and say that might be around 1, that gives you the idea that Trump could very well be quite well on in the zone of a potential win. Now, of course, this is a national poll, and when you get to state polls, there's a lot of evidence coming out that from some of the polls that are out there that Trump is really closing in a lot of the key states. And that would include, states such as Florida. He looks like he's doing pretty good there. There's also some evidence, I guess it's kind of a little bit more anecdotal, but evidence that the early voting, the Republican turnout is looking pretty good compared to normal. Now, what that says ultimately, we don't know. But that's an encouraging sign. I think the same is true maybe in North Carolina. And so that looks like at this time there's a pretty good chance that we'll be able to win these competitive states. There's a little bit of a confusion on what's going on in Georgia, but then again, anytime a state gets a little bit potentially competitive, you can expect some liberal polls will sweep in and give the information out that's adverse to Trump. So I'm a little bit cautious there. Trump is going to make one last campaign rally, I think, in Georgia, which could be seen as a sign of caution. But that's, the odds I still think are high that Trump will be able to pull things up. There's also a series of Trafalgar polls, which showing Trump running very strongly in places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona. And these are very tough competitive states that Trump needs to win most of those. And so, although not all, again, he doesn't need to get 306 electoral votes this year to win. He needs to get above 270. And as I say, for safety, we want to get something about, around 275 or thereabouts. You want a few extra electors minimum, so if you have a few unfaithful, you can still win. So that's kind of the way I see it. I think that right now, I would say the odds are marginally in favor of Trump winning. The downside to Trump is that, to a degree, Biden is operating from a high base of well over 200 electoral votes in states such as California, Illinois, and New York, etc., which there's like zero chance, I think, of a Trump win there. That would be a shocker. I guess it would have to indicate a very complacent Democrat electorate in those states and a high turnout of Trump votes and a bunch of independents just saying to heck with it or something. But I don't see anything like that developing at all. So that's the nature of the race, and Trump is continuing to make 4 stops in Pennsylvania today, and he's going to go on campaigning until through Monday. So looks good there. Again, there's no certainty in this thing at all, as I can see, but just the only certainty right now is a very high voter turnout seems to be occurring. Now, this is why I said there was a caveat, and I want to kind of hit that caveat a little bit here, and that is, how could I be wrong or dramatically wrong? And the way that would be is that there is a spectacular turnout. Just take Texas, for example. There's a roughly 16 million registered voters in Texas, and already in the early voting and in the absentee voting, there's been 9.7 million votes have been recorded, okay? And that is more by about, I think, 800,000 roughly than what we had during the entire 2016 election. So, which leaves a big question I would like to ask, like, well, who's going to vote on election day anyhow? I do know this. I am going to take a trip by my normal poll. I've already voted in early voting, but I'm going to drive by the polling place maybe once or twice that day just to kind of see what's happening, because I'm kind of wondering if this is going to be a thing that everybody that wanted to vote has pretty much already voted, and now we're going to get hit with a very light turnout on election day. I mean, there's still enough registered voters. It could still be a pretty substantial turnout on election day. And that gets into the question, we obviously are having voters voting that don't typically vote, right? Didn't find the last election to be worth voting in, maybe not the one before that. And so, and of course, some of them are new to the state, obviously, that's definitely the case. But I'm kind of looking at this thing from a certain point of view and saying, well, here's the deal. We believe that within that roughly 6 million registered voters that are left that haven't voted, there are a large number of Republican-leaning people, a large number of Democrat-leaning people. They may be essentially independent, but I think their philosophies will align with one of the other parties. They'll either kind of like Trump or they'll kind of not like Trump, etc. And so what this comes down to is the following. Is there an asymmetrical turnout by one group or the other? Or is it pretty much just random and basically there's just a higher turnout, but it doesn't change the percentages from what you might see in polling from the state, okay? And that's what will determine the situation. The possibility of a catastrophe upset for Trump would be that a large number of Democrat-leaning people that normally don't vote, for whatever reason, turn out and vote this time and were to flip the state. And because the voting turnout is high all over the place, in other states as well. That same phenomena could happen. And since Texas is an example, it's not doesn't register by party in terms of voting. It's hard to track exactly who's turning out to vote and things like that. I think it has to be done a little bit more by exit polling or just talking to people that are doing phone banking and stuff like that. And I don't have a good sense of this at all. We do know that tremendous amounts of out-of-state money is coming in, and for that and the Senate candidate, the motorcycle mama, MJ Hagar. So always on her motorcycle there, but running against the amiable elderly John Cornyn, I guess. So at any rate, we'll see how that works out. My own thinking, my own instincts, I would have liked to see the Republicans do a harder hitting campaign. I mean, to me, the issues that really matter aren't really even being discussed here, hardly, in terms of at least the Republicans. I mean, they're not discussing the basic threat to the constitutional system that the Democrats pose, because they, as I've said in other videos, they found the fracture point in our system, and they're threatening to do something about it. After all, it's one thing if a minor figure in the party recommends something radical, it's something else if their leader, Chuck Schumer, seems to be game for it. So that's why this is a very, very critical election. I don't know, a lot of things are on the line here. And I sort of have a feeling, I was a little concerned the other day, and now today I've kind of taken a different attitude, and we'll see if I'm right or wrong here, that maybe people see the threat that these Democrats pose, particularly Biden's threat to the oil industry, which of course for Texas is the major industry of the state, the oil and gas industry. So if they were to suffer a big setback in that area, this state would be in financial difficulty and probably having some major troubles. So, that's one thing I'd point out that might be a factor bringing people out. Maybe they actually realize that. Then again, maybe they don't. I don't know. We're going to find out, I guess, on Tuesday, because I think we're not one of these states that's going to have a tremendous backlog of I don't know if it'll be a mail-in ballot, wait for 5 days kind of thing. I think they're going to be in on time this year. And so we'll see. I just thought I'd mention that as an example, but similar things are playing out in Florida, North Carolina, and other states, different rules in different states. And on the Senate races, again, as I've gone through that, the real hope for the Republicans is a couple of pickups. High confidence, I think, in Alabama, I believe, should happen, and a good shot in Michigan, particularly if Trump wins it. I think that would be, likely if Trump were to win Michigan. And so then that would move our starting base from 53 to 55. Then the question, how many other states we end up losing? And the ones that are again at risk, very competitive races in Arizona, Colorado, I guess Iowa, and Maine. And so hopefully we'll be able to win a couple of those out of the set. And then you have the Georgia races, but I think the Republicans have a certain edge there in that if it's very, very close, it's likely to get kicked into runoffs, and so that ultimately the Republicans probably will be able to, pull out the victories in the runoff races. Hopefully it doesn't even go there in the Purdue versus Ossoff race. But at the same time, you have to look at the Libertarian Party and so forth, and then the other race obviously is going to go to a runoff because you have a Democrat running against two fairly strong Republican candidates, and so that's going to happen there. Okay, well that kind of is about it. I mean, we've discussed the whole issue of the Hunter Biden memo issues. The other issue I think to me to bring about Biden is the guy is lacing speeches and the incoherent things he's saying. It's obvious that the guy is not fit to be president mentally. I mean, he really isn't. He's not up for the job, and he's barely up for the campaign. And so people voting on this have to understand they're probably voting for Kamala Harris for president down the road here, and probably not that long into the term. And the fact that Nancy Pelosi is already thinking about putting a commission together to utilize the 25th Amendment seems to be related to this in some ways. So, at any rate, that's all for today. We'll just have to wait till election day and after and see how this pans out. Very kind of the country really is at a pivot point in its history. I think that's for sure. And so if you like these videos, give me a like, give me any comments you have, and subscribe, and you can forward copies to other people so they can see them. All for now, and until next time.